Hello, my name is Oisín Byrne, Research Director at iReach Insights based in Dublin. Welcome to our spring series of briefings looking at consumer generations in Ireland. This is the third and last in our series of 3 briefings where we have looked at different attitudes and insights across generations from Gen Z through to boomers. Today, we're focusing on extending those insights into developing pen profile or buyer personas to allow organizations target buyer groups much more accurately and more effectively than just generations. We'll have a quick catch up of our first 2 briefings, which are also available on our YouTube channel. And we'll build upon that in terms of developing buyer attributes and behavioral attributes that allows us to group buyers together by not just age and gender, but also amongst hobbies, lifestyle issues, interests, which we'll talk about in the next 40 or 45 minutes. These are all layered to allow us to segment and create bullseye buyer groups or persona clusters to allow organizations target more effectively buyer groups. We build upon that looking at brand engagement to help organizations understand what buyer persona and pen profiles might look like for their organizations. And we'll finish with some iReach case studies, particularly 2 where we've helped Royal Caribbean develop their segmentation, as well as e-bookers across Europe. I'll quickly bring you through iReach Insights, what we do. We have 4 core parts to our business: iReach Insights, which is our marketing and research arm; iReach Analytics, some areas we'll talk about today, where we're now developing predictive analytics to help organizations understand their internal data as well as connecting with external data. Core to our business is our iReach Conversations platform, which contains over 40,000 consumers on the island of Ireland. Uniquely, we have panels covering the UK, international markets, and specialist panels in Ireland, looking at teen youth research, as well as our generational focus. We blend leading technologies with our best practices across the industry, great people, and an innovative approach and a tech-savvy approach to engaging market research projects in more effective and efficient ways. As I've mentioned already, core to our business are our panels. We have a consumer panel of over 40,000 in Ireland, a business panel of just under 10,000 business decision makers, and panels across Northern Ireland and GB. As I've mentioned as well, we have a specialist teens and youth panel, which we've been building over the last few years. We work across all research methods. We normally recommend hybrid research methodologies, especially for areas like segmentation analysis across surveys as well as focus groups. And we blend many technologies and new technologies with our research methodologies. Another offering is what we call our omnibus. This is where we run nationally representative surveys at least twice a month. And it's within this methodology that we've included questions that have helped develop these briefings over the last number of months. We also, as I've mentioned, provide qualitative research under our iFocus brand, which is mainly comprising of focus groups, workshops, as well as video at home for in-home product testing and tasting. Our most recent offer is our iReach Brand Pulse, which is a new solution we're bringing to market to allow organizations, with our help, build their own specialist consumer panels and engage in a wide range of research methodologies. Examples include looking at buyer journeys in detail, new product development, as well as online workshops and community groups with consumers. I'm not going to go through this in much detail. It's available in both the previous 2 briefings, but just to help people understand the importance and how the different generations look in terms of sheer population numbers and gender splits. Gen Z, which is very interesting to many organizations to engage with younger age groups within their brand. Just under 1 million sit within Gen Z in Ireland. Gen Y or millennials, a little bit more, just over 1.1 million. Again, very equally split by gender. Generation X, you see the age groups born in 1966 to 1980. Again, an equal split almost in terms of gender, and just over 1 million. in Ireland. And then finally, boomers, anyone born before 1965, and just a little over 1 million, and again, slightly heavily weighted towards females in Ireland. The two previous briefings really looked at a number of issues. The first briefing, which is available, as I said, on our YouTube channel, looked at spending priorities for 2025, and we broke the results out by the different generations. The second briefing, which I have some example slides here, really looked at brand engagement and how different age groups, different generations engage with different brands, which are their favorite brands, why they're a favorite brand, in terms of advocacy, why they're loyal to a particular brand. And as you see on this particular slide, we break out the results by the different generations. So it allows us and you to see in this presentation the differences across those generations, and as well as different attitudes to brands, different ways of engaging with brands, which we covered in great detail in our second briefing. One area that you'll see in the second briefing, which I'm just recapping on here today, is some of the key triggers for brand engagement and how they differ across the different generations. And you'll see that areas that we research in terms of brand triggers, things like trust, value, rewards, being inspired, are all key in terms of getting a good connection with different buyer groups. But a key reason we developed this, which feeds directly into today, is we introduced the concept of indexing. So if I go back to the previous slide, you'll see of all survey takers, of all 1,000 adults in Ireland that took this survey, 33% said they like, and they a brand that excites them, they're more likely to engage with at an emotional level. And underneath that, you'll see a breakdown by Gen Z. 51% feel excitement is hugely important to them in terms of emotional engagement, and that drops right down to 16% of boomers. So while this is really important to understand, sometimes it's hard to compare the differences between those generations, particularly if the numbers aren't that low. So we introduced the concept of indexing. This is where we take a base, in this case, 33% of everyone that took the survey is the base. And then we index, so we compare each generation against that index. So it allows us to show that Gen Z over-index by almost 1.5 times, and boomers at 47 significantly under-index, so about half of the average. So that allows us to do it in a very simple and visual way to see, for example, if you want to talk to Gen Zers, exciting them is going to be hugely important and much more important than any other of those generations. However, if we look at trust, that's most important for boomers. So they over-index by, in essence, 34% or 134. So it means trust for them is much more important than it is for Gen Z, for example. Still, it's reasonably important. Value, again, really important for boomers. So they over-index by 0.22 or 122, and again, less important for Gen Z. So this allows us in a very simple way to snapshot, excuse me, how different age groups, different generations differ against the norm. So everything is compared to the norm, or that 33%. In the previous briefing, we looked at emotional barriers to stop people engaging with a brand, feeling ripped off, annoyed. It's an impersonal service, not rewarded, not valued. Again, hugely important, and you can see the different percentages there. But when we overlay that with our indexing, again, it's much easier to read. So you don't have to work out the maths in your head. You can see very quickly if it's important to everybody, which I think being annoyed certainly being ripped off is important pretty much the board. But you'll be able to see quite simple and visually what that looks like. In terms of the colors, so green is we show green if it's significantly over-indexing or more than the average. Amber if it's pretty close to the average, so it's not significantly different. And then that purple color is more if it's significantly under indexed. So it shows the statistical importance of those differences. So green, you over index, purple, you under index, and then if it's orange, it's about the norm, or it's within that margin of error for the norm. And we see other examples of this in terms of how we present that information. So why that's important is as we start developing our buyer personas, each of these tell a story. So when we combine, for example, in this slide, we ask about sharing experience on social media, either very regularly or very occasionally. We can see that's hugely important and hugely over-indexing for Gen Z compared to boomers. And we start building a picture, combining all of those different questions and all of those indexes or percentage differences for those generations to start telling a story about who they are, what it's like to be within that generation. And really what's important is how do brands understand and engage with that? And again, you see that here, particularly if we look at shopping around that 40% in amber, you can see it's significantly over-indexing for Gen Z as well as for millennials. So again, it just means that you don't have to worry about the maths too much. You just know that these are standout differences to the norm across a range of different topics. So why that's important and why we extend this into behavioral and personality attributes. Not everything about being in the same generation makes you the same type of buyer. Not everything being a millennial will make you exactly the same as any other millennials, because people's personalities are different, their hobbies or interests are different, their behavioral personalities or personas are differently also. So on top of the demographics, your age, your generation, we then start overlaying lots of different items or topics that will be of interest to a brand. Most brands will be interested in technology. So it's less about the actual products or the use of social media, but again, it's more about identifying the differences of how these how different personalities compare or contrast to each other. So as well as technology, we look at self-concept. So for example, top left, success is very important to me. Loyalty to brands, I like learning about new things. And again, different age groups and different personalities will consider and score those differently. And again, we're layering lots of different layers, lots of different perspectives, lots of different attributes above just age and gender. We look at social impacts. So I'm an out owl, I'm fun to be around. I consider myself to be an extrovert, and these will all be tied back into the brand itself. What's important to the brand? If it's in the hospitality business, socializing a lot, meeting new people are things that are important. But again, it allows us to understand, unique insights, unique differences across not just demographics, but across attitudes and interests. Shopping lifestyles, I'm more interested in added value. When I shop, I always compare prices. So again, these are just some examples of different layers that we can create and add to build those personas, which tie back to the brand. We look at entertainment activities, we look at home activities. All of these can be overlaid and overlaid on top of the age and demographics, as I've already said. Shopping triggers, value for money, and so on. So there are many different layers. There's almost an unlimited amount of layers or type of layers we can create to really extend our understanding of the individual and groups of individuals on top of demographics. This all feeds into segmentation and persona development. So this is where we look at targeting clusters or personas differently to create the best opportunities for growth. And again, all of these are totally tailorable in terms of what layers you create, be it attitudes to topics, attitudes to green issues, attitudes to sustainability, as well as shopping habits, interests, and so on. So we call this cluster analysis. So this is where a lot of science and predictive analytics comes into play, where we create across all our different age groups 5 or 6 like-minded cohorts, which we further develop into personas, and then we further develop those into pen profiles. So we really start painting the picture of those different groups by all those layers of attributes and personality attributes as well. Key in this is once the personas and the target rich buyers are created, then organizations need to build their brand, media, and marketing strategy around with this to allow marketing budget to be more effectively spent, to allow media to be more effectively purchased, and for the brand to more effectively engage with more connected buyer groups. And then finally, personas can be integrated with CRM to really start developing the customer journey further, which we're not going to cover in this particular presentation. So really the importance for persona development is really to identify those bullseye targeted customers. And often what we do is we might find, and we might see 5 clusters together, and I'll show you a great example of this in our case studies. However, organizations mightn't target all of those clusters because some clusters or some personas will be low margin, low value, low levels of loyalty, low levels of return purchase. So you're really actually taking out the ones that are least likely to make margin or make profit, and really emphasize your activities in marketing and associated media spend with those that are much more likely to deliver value for money. So so it's about pinpointing and targeting the overall strategy to those different groups. So as you've seen, I've given you some great examples of a lot of the quantitative data that we use. And then often when we're developing the personas and creating the clusters to target, we do interviews or focus groups to really make sure that what we see in the data can connect to real people. So it really allows us to make sure and to test our understanding of personas to make sure that they're real and valid. And sometimes we test different messaging on behalf of brands to make sure that we can connect with those personas in an effective way. So we brought you through the background. So that's your demographics. That would be age. Often, that demographic will be where people live, their regions, their counties, if it's urban or rural. So it really is that kind of demographic information, home ownership status, working status, ABC ones, and so on. And then this is where we're getting into those layers I've introduced already. So those habits, mannerisms, attitudes to a range of different topics that are important or connect with the brand. And here are some other examples. Goals and opportunities, challenges. So again, these are all fluid and really will differ brand to brand, organization to organization, and sector to sector. So when we're developing personas, there's a huge amount of science involved to really go through all of those different, many different attributes across demographics and personality, and really start pulling those together across many layers, and then looking at what's going to be a profitable group, what cluster are least likely to generate profit. We'll share an example, we have an example of a retailer where their smallest group, which is not unusual, your 80-20 rule, that their smallest cohort that we've identified for bullseye was their most profitable, the ones that did most cross purchasing. And then we identified, as we'll see with the eBookers case study, that there were groups that there was no point in targeting marketing to, because they will always just buy the cheapest flight or the cheapest holiday, and no matter what you could do with marketing was going to help. So that clustering is hugely important to really identify. In this example, young mothers will spend 2.8 times more in store to get assistance from staff. So this is just an example of the type of insights that we generate to help organizations know who their key target market is and how to identify and target those from this particular type of work. And obviously this has to become embedded within the organization. It has to become embedded in terms of brand managers, marketing managers, people, if it's a retail example that I've used already, people on the floor. So to really understand how it all hangs together across the organization. So the final part is then the brand and how they engage with it. So once we have our personas, we have our clusters, then it really has to be brought into the total organization for it to be effective and to work and to really become heart and soul or part of the language within the organization. So that extends across CRM, website, emails, blog, digital content, social media content, sales, how to target promotions and offer loyalty programs, and really develop the marketing strategy to connect with that. That also includes media, and then the services and the supports that the organization needs to provide to really maximize revenue and opportunity amongst those, what we would call bullseye clusters. So just to finish off, we're looking at some examples of what these PEM profiles might look like. So we've introduced the generations and overlaid these over the last two briefings. And this just gives you an example of what the outputs might look like. So this is from research we did ourselves back in 2023. And this is where we've grouped the key differences and what really stands out for each generation. So in this example, if you look at top left, what you'll see in red is where they significantly under-index, and green is where they significantly over-index. So Gen Z are loyal to brands, much higher than the average. They tend to influence family and friends, again, significantly over-index, 140. They consider themselves to be a leader, obviously because of their age and where they're at in their careers or at the later stages of college or school even. House proud, way under index, as you could imagine. Their value for money is less important than price, they significantly under index, and so on. When we look at lifestyles, we see again there, they socialize a lot, almost double the average. And then we look at activities, hobbies. So again, we see concerts, for example, the over-index, photography, the over-index. So you'll see a lot of different areas where we start telling the story of a particular cohort. In this instance, it's by age and what really stands out across a lot of these activities, hobbies, and habits, as well as the core demographics. This is one that many people might be more familiar with, your PEM profile, and this is where we actually start creating a name or creating a personality that becomes internalized, so people know when we're talking about marketing Mary what we mean, what her likely, where she might live. She might be likely to be more urban. She's likely to be ABC1. She might likely to be single, middle or higher management, and so on. So these are all different pictures we paint and create from our segmentation and persona development. So to finish off, bring you through some outputs from two case studies. The first one is Royal Caribbean, which we worked with them across the UK and Ireland. And with all the layers that we discussed already, we identified 3 new clusters. And again, these were developed, we gave them names because we want to try and develop the visual as well as verbal understanding of what these particular clusters stand for. So we had wealthy strivers, discerning young parents. One of the key areas that Royal Caribbean were hugely important for them to target was to move away from the perception that people who cruise are likely to be retirees or honeymooners, to really develop a whole new strategy targeting families, targeting people who want to have fun, targeting people that really want to engage with all the range of different activities that are available on a cruise, as well as visiting loads of locations, lots of shows, and so on. We understand the relationship between the value of spend as well as the number of people. So in this example, we could see cluster 3, which represents 32% of their customer base, only accounted for 27% of their revenue. 25% cluster 2 was slightly higher revenue, and then cluster 3 you could see was higher revenue again, 43 to 46. What we needed to do is to develop and grow those areas that aren't currently included, like those family groups as regular cruise goers. So this became internalized. So this was again part of the marketing, and this underpinned the marketing strategy in terms of the names of the cohorts, the importance of the current base of those cohorts. So if you look at over to the far right, active retirees over 1 and 2 of people who were cruising at the time sit in this group. There's a lot of them, market potential just over 4.5 million. But again, no matter how much marketing spend was thrown at this, then it was really going to unlikely to grow the base in terms of revenues. So a key growth market were the two markets on the left, the Friday loving feeling or the Friday feeling extroverts, and then the young parents. And you can see both of those had between the two of them over 5 million in terms of cruising opportunities to develop and to grow from that 6% of the current base for those far left to start bringing them up into line with the others and get a much more balanced mix of cruisers across the Royal Caribbean brand. And then when we did a deep dive on those wealthy strivers, there's a lot in this here. But again, this is where we start telling the story of the differences, what stands out, their spending power, their demographics, their booking behaviors, their preferences. So we really do a deep dive on all those triggers to help Royal Caribbean target them to engage with the brand and to be loyal to the brand and to in essence travel and book holidays and book cruises with the brand. The second case study looks at ebookers. We ran multiple clustering projects across UK, France, Germany, Finland, Sweden, and Switzerland, where we surveyed those that book or use online travel agents. And that was almost 5,000 surveys across all these countries. We had a clean split between those that used ebookers and those that didn't. So that was a 50-50 split. And again, what's a really useful concept to consider with segmentation is we learn from our existing customers or our loyal customers to bring in new customers. So that's where it was really important that we got a balance across those that were users of ebookers and those that weren't, and in essence to try and see how we overlay and take learnings from the clusters we identified with the customer base and overlay that with non-customers to again allow marketing to target that. And this is in essence the kind of the core layers we created. So we overlaid all those demographic information, their experience with online travel agency brands, both ebookers and others, as well as a wide range of travel behaviors covering things like budget spend, accommodation, rentals, and so on, to really identify and see how we group those and how we cluster those different travelers together. So we had a mix of different clusters. So this is where it's important that you don't want to have too few, let's say 2 or 3, because that's not going to help with marketing in terms of targeting those bullseyes. Or you don't want too many, because again, marketing to too many different clusters can be again more expensive than to targeting everyone under the same marketing campaign. So it's trying to get that balance between the numbers and type of clusters. And this is just showing how we overlayered the different attributes, the different attitudes, the different demographics, engagement with online travel agents, and we came up with 5 clusters. And why I think this is a really good case study is we actually identified really 3 clusters to target from a marketing perspective. So again, it's as well as kind of identifying where to target and where to spend marketing budget, it's also important to know where not to spend marketing budget, and particularly even as a start of a journey to really maximize margins from existing customers and then start developing and learning from those to recruit new customers into the business. So this is where we came up with 3 target groups that really marketing wrapped around their activities. And this just shows the split in different opportunity scale, and again where budget should be aligned with is where the biggest opportunity is. So with ebookers as well as Royal Caribbean, we overlaid a lot of internal transactional data to allow us to show how a different cluster is likely to spend and the opportunity scale in terms of value as well as costs. And this is where we can see it here. So In terms of spend potential, we see 20% opportunity for those frequent online travel agency bookers that spend less than 3K. And then we have the second opportunity, or highest opportunity, of those occasional OTA bookers, who we see a 6% opportunity. And then we see those price only buyers, which again, plenty of sectors are very price perspective. So again, these are clusters that will just go with the lowest cost base, the lowest price, no matter how much marketing spend is thrown at it. So that was a whirlwind tour through the approach to segmentation, the layering across different areas that will be unique to each brand on top of core demographics, extending out the understanding of just generations by age to really look at a whole range of personality attributes, as well as shopping attributes, technology attributes, whatever is most impactful for a particular brand. And then using the science of clustering and segmentation, we then group people with like-minded attitudes as well as demographics together and identify and overlay those with transactional data to see where the biggest opportunity is, to also identify where the low opportunity exists in terms of growth. And again, once that's internalized, it allows organizations to better manage marketing budget, media budget, to better target CRM, loyalty programs, promotional activities, and so on. So it really becomes and underpins and becomes part of the internal language of the business, which is the hugely important part, and where organizations that do this and do this well will see the benefits. So thank you for your time today. I hope you found it useful. Please do have a look at the other briefings on our YouTube channel, and my details are here if you have any questions. As I said, it's Oisin Byrne at iReachHQ.com, and please feel free to reach out if you need to. Thank you for your time.